Welcome, everyone. Greetings. Welcome to yet another roundtable on saving elephants. So glad you could join us this evening. I have here a panel of originals, a panel of individuals who are old hats at this, have been here before, not only on the podcast, but on these panels before. Of course, Eric Cohn with Empower Illinois, dedicated to universal school choice there in the state of Illinois, and previously with the Acton Institute, both fine organizations. Calvin Moore, my good friend, goes back many years. We've been on multiple podcast projects, both as guests and co-hosts. And Kent Straith, who is a good friend of Calvin's, and I guess vicariously a good friend of mine in the process. Yes, we make up a cross-partisan roundtable this evening. I think this is the first time we're going to have a cross-partisan roundtable with an even left-right split. So this should be interesting. The topic is a big one, and we can go a couple of directions with it. But in light of the second assassination attempt on Donald Trump, I just thought it was worth talking about rhetoric in politics, whether or not this is leading to this violence. And as I was talking in the green room before we hit record here, I sort of come up with this idea, hey, we need to talk about this, a number of days ago, because I just assumed we would all be talking about this for a week to come. And I don't know if it's as simple as the first assassination attempt was novel because it was the first one on Trump. It happened at a live rally. There with his fist shouting fight. I don't know if this one's just boring, but we got really close for a second time to Donald Trump literally being killed. And it almost seems, okay, what's the next news cycle? So is this the new normal? Are we making too much of it, or are we not making enough of this?
Let me start by saying the reason it is less of a big deal for me personally, and maybe at the end of this topic, I won't feel good about feeling this way. But it was less of a big deal because not only did the guy not fire his gun, he never actually saw Trump. So was it an assassination attempt? Yeah, if everything goes according to plan, but it wasn't one in the same way as the other one was, with a fired bullet and blood on his face. It's a different magnitude.
It's almost like guys who say they went hunting for the weekend and then nothing walked by their blind at all. Yeah. Does it still count? I attempted to go hunting, but you didn't actually do any hunting at all. You sat in a blind.
Yeah, there is a sense at which it seems like there was an effort very quickly among law enforcement to congratulate Secret Service. And let me be clear, those operatives on the ground at the golf course, so far as I tell, and I'm not an expert in this, appear to have done a stellar job. I mean, they did what they were supposed to do. Now, it remains open a question of, well, should he have had more protection? Should we not be expecting this? Should the gunman have even been able to get as close as he did? I don't know. But it is interesting, the juxtaposition between this attack and then the previous one, where it was almost the precise opposite of how on earth could someone, clearly the audience can see, has a gun, as even alerting law enforcement, and nothing happens, and it gets several shots off on Donald Trump. And so this is something that I think we're still waiting for. It's probably in all of our best interest, left, right, Democrat, Republican, to have a Secret Service that we all have a lot of faith in and does their job very well. But I'm just curious, are you guys concerned about the state of the Secret Service? Is this something that we need to be getting to the bottom of, or did they do their job and there's nothing to fear?
Well, I think they did their job. But the fact of the matter is, okay, so bear with me on this analogy. In 2020, a lot of people were working really dead-end jobs, and we told them, go get a real job, right? And then we all decided to go get fast food when things started to open up again, and everybody was understaffed because all the people that we told to go get real jobs went and got real jobs, and those are not fast food jobs, right? So now fast food is understaffed. They just are. The Secret Service is woefully understaffed, right? They are tasked with, obviously, the main reason the Secret Service exists, a lot of people don't know, is to stop counterfeiting, right? But I mean, that's one of the main reasons. But they also are the elite bodyguard service of our top officials in the United States, for lack of a better word, right? They have a particular type of training that other law enforcement does not get, right? They get elite training to protect heads of state. So you have them currently protecting the president of the United States. You have them also protecting the person running for the both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are also being protected. You have, I believe, Supreme Court justices are also protected by Secret Service. They have a different kind of service. But either way, you've got a lot of different, their families are being protected by Secret Service. So you have the Secret Service stretched thin.
Don't forget former presidents.
And former presidents for life, right?
Yep.
So you have the Secret Service that is woefully understaffed, highly trained, understaffed, right? And so when we're asking, hey, is there something we can do about this? You just need more people. You can't make these people overnight. They're elite trained. And so because they are understaffed, they now have to rely on local law enforcement to come in and help kind of fill in the gaps when a person is coming through and giving a stump speech, whether that be the president or someone running for president, right? And so I think that when you pair the elite with people who are not elite because they are understaffed, we have this conversation of, well, what's going on with the Secret Service? Are they not trained? They're highly trained. Their training is great. We saw that with this most recent thing. Like, our eyes are on. We know what's going on. But when you're stretched in and you don't have enough people, you can only see so far. So we see the first Trump attempt makes more sense. This one, it's like, hey, we got lucky. We did see the guy, but we have the people trained. But I think it's all the thing we're not talking about. I'm sorry, I'm rambling a little bit. The thing we're not talking about is the fact that the Secret Service is undertrained. They are understaffed. Because they are understaffed, they have to rely on people who are undertrained to help them do their jobs.
If the question is, do I have confidence in the Secret Service? I think this is kind of a unique point. I don't know how far, if this has ever happened before, but this seems to be a unique point in history where people on both sides of the political aisle have a bone to pick with the Secret Service. Republicans, rightly, and all Americans, have a bone to pick with the Secret Service. Is like, how come people keep shooting at Donald Trump? Conversely, and I think it's not the same director of the Secret Service because the most recent director resigned. But conversely, in the hours and a couple of days immediately following the January 6th attack, Secret Service somehow mysteriously deleted all of their text messages. And there are a lot of theories why that happened. And so I would say that no matter who you are, you probably have some pretty big questions about the agency right now.
The Secret Service has also been enveloped in a number of scandals over the last 10, 20 years. There was the whole hiring what we believe to be prostitutes, I believe, while they were in Bogota, Colombia, or at least someplace in South America. I have not seen the reporting, if there is reporting that they are understaffed. It wouldn't surprise me if they are, but I have just not seen reporting to indicate that. I did read that the kind of envelope that is around the president of the United States is unique and large, to the extent that the same kind of envelope of protection does not surround candidates for the presidency, even if those candidates are former presidents of the United States. So I think there are some interesting questions that probably now do need to be asked about the level of protection that is being provided to, say, former presidents, that is being provided to candidates for president. I imagine Kamala Harris is probably of a higher nature or higher level of protection because she is also the vice president of the United States. So I think there are some questions for the Secret Service. And I think Kent is right that there are Republicans and Democrats with good reason to not be happy with the Secret Service as of this moment in time.
Does Jimmy Carter need, God love him, does Jimmy Carter need Secret Service at this point? Probably not.
Well, there are enough crazies out there who just want to be famous.
Yeah, I know that, we'll get on to something else in a second. My brother is a private investigator and is out of town a lot. And a couple of years ago, he sent me a photo. He was in Chicago, and he sent me a photo of the Secret Service detail outside the house that the Obamas own in Chicago. They are never, ever there.
Yep.
It is the best gig imaginable if you're going to be a federal agent. It was like 2 black SUVs parked butt to butt and a sign saying, "Don't go down this street." And I have to imagine that their wives are pretty sure they're coming home at the end of the day. Because I mean, it's so I think.
Yeah, but they're Gerard Butler and Olympus Has Fallen. They're like, I don't want this desk job. I want to be protecting the president. I'm protecting his house when he's not here. But I hear you on that. That's funny.
Yes.
But on the assassination thing, though, I'm sorry. Obama was the earliest candidate, if I recall, back in 2007 when he was running. He was the first candidate to ask for Secret Service protection as early as a candidate could, right? Because the threats to his life were through the roof. Because he is, he was, he's going to be the first black president of the United States, right? And so the threats for anyone running for president, they all get threats. The Secret Service is constantly culling through these things, right? But it's on record. I mean, it's on record. It's a stat. It is a matter of fact that Obama got more threats than any other president in history as a candidate, right? And so I think you have that also facing both of our candidates who are running right now. You have people who are willing to do crazy things. Some just, hey, I want to be famous. Doesn't even matter who I'm shooting at. And you have other people who are like, hey, I've got political ideology that I'd like. I don't like this guy who's in office, and so I want to kill them, or this person who's running, I want to kill them. You have all sorts of people who are willing to do something insane. They're willing to assassinate someone because of a political ideology, or just because I want my name to go down in infamy. But the fact of the matter is, you still do have major threats on presidents' lives, former presidents' lives, presidential candidates' lives. And so when you hear right now the rhetoric or the question of, why aren't they shooting at Trump, or why are they shooting at Trump and not at Kamala? Like, rest assured, there are plenty of attempts that we're not hearing about, that you won't hear about, because the Secret Service is doing its job, even when understaffed. They are stopping threats. They are going to people's houses and hey, you said this online. We're questioning you. We're detaining you. Those kinds of things. That kind of stuff is being done. We don't hear as much about that. We hear about the sensational. Hey, there was a guy at the golf course. Hey, Trump was giving a speech and got his ear, all that jazz. But I don't want it to seem, while I'm saying the Secret Service is understaffed, I don't want it to seem like I'm saying they're also incapable of doing their job, because they're still pulling it off even when short-staffed to a degree.
Yeah, and I am, and I think, Calvin, part of what you're saying is cutting to the heart of this evening's conversation, because this is an election year. Emotions are particularly high, and the temptation, whether it's justifiable or not, to turn this into, to try to draw straight lines between would-be assassins and them being weaponized or encouraged by one political ideology or another, I think is particularly strong right now. Gerald Ford, there was an attempted assassination on Gerald Ford's life from someone who's a former follower of Charles Manson. I don't think anybody was out there trying to figure out what was the Democratic Party. What's that?
Squeaky Fromm. Yeah.
Yeah, Squeaky.
Gerald Ford, actually, there were 2 attempts on his life.
There were 2.
In 17 days. Yeah.
And I'm mentioning that
one person hasn't beat the person who tried to kill Andrew Jackson.
Yeah.
2 attempts in a minute and a half.
Okay, we're going to call that one.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I think Jackson has Trump beat, because not only defiantly shook his fist in the air, he actually charged his would-be assassin, and that.
He beat him within an inch of his life with the cane that he carried around.
Which is about the most Jacksonian thing that he could do. Yeah.
That and the Trail of Tears. Yes. That and the Trail of Tears.
But anyhow, where I was going with that is that I think most of us easily recognize the difference between Squeaky shooting at Gerald Ford, this follower of Marilyn Manson, Charles Manson. She may have liked Marilyn Manson too, for all we know.
Yeah.
A deranged lunatic, right? And the very first thing that happens when one of these assassination attempts happen is for understandable reasons, we immediately think, whoa, were they influenced by rhetoric they've heard from the other side, or is this just some deranged lunatic who would have just as easily taken a pot shot at Joe Biden or Kamala Harris if they were given the opportunity? And it seems like both sides have this kind of latent, no, the other side is weaponizing the rhetoric to the degree that is actually leading to political violence. I think my concern is sometimes it can be near impossible to know if this rhetoric is what instigated this violent act. That being said, it's not gone unnoticed by me that we are living in a time when, it's frequently said democracy is on the ballot by both sides, that Trump represents a dictator, that, Trump himself, and since he is in a lot of ways the victim in these last two assassination attempts, I want to give him his due. That being said, as much as he calls for toning down the rhetoric, he does with equal voice throw things into that rhetoric that don't seem to be toning it down much. For example, he said, I believe it was on Truth Social, the rhetoric of Biden and Harris, or rather this individual who shot at him, heard the rhetoric of Biden and Harris and acted on it. Their rhetoric is causing me to be shot at when I am the one who's going to save the country. They are the ones that are destroying the country, both of them from the inside. And then earlier he had said, I think it was that same day on Twitter, the rhetoric lies as exemplified by the false statements made by Comrade Kamala Harris during the rigged and highly partisan ABC debate and all the ridiculous lawsuits designed to inflict damage on Joe and Harris's political opponent, me, have taken politics in our country to a whole new level of hatred, abuse, and distrust because of this communist left rhetoric. The bullets are flying and will only get worse. Statements like that are not exactly toning things down. And I'm not saying that the Democrats are faultless here. But I don't know this is so much a direct question as just an open-ended, do we have a problem with political rhetoric in this country?
Let me say a couple of things. One, about that piece from Trump that you just read. Trump is and always has been a closest weapon to hand arguer. He will pick up anything that is convenient to him and use it to his advantage, even if it doesn't align that well with reality. So there's a lot about Donald Trump's rhetoric, and particularly a lot of what he said there, that from a factual standpoint, a reality standpoint, I think is dismissible and understandable in that sense of he is just picking up what is convenient to him and what is convenient to him in that moment and making an argument out of it. To go back to the question that is displayed at the top of my page here, through which we are streaming this fantastic program, does political rhetoric incite violence? I think the answer is it can. The impetus for our conversation, however, the Butler, Pennsylvania assassination attempt on Donald Trump and the one that is a week ago that again feels like it was about 5 months ago, I think neither of these to me qualify as acts of political violence. I think both of these individuals strike me as cranks, strike me as unwell people. I don't see a discernible political ideology at play there. I don't see a discernible political agenda. And I don't see discernible political ends from either of them. We may learn more about the individual that was arrested in Florida, although from what what I've seen already and read from his social media posts, if one is trying to divine ideology from his political viewpoints, I think you're going to be all over the place because he was also careening all over the place. So I think political rhetoric can incite violence. I don't know that the rhetoric that we have had in this election is inciting any of this. I don't think there's a lot of evidence to suggest that it is. And there's also a long history in America of ridiculous political rhetoric. I mean, one of my favorite pieces that I have seen produced was from the good people at Reason Magazine, who put together what was, this is about 10, 12 years ago, when we were going through another one of these fits about political rhetoric and the things people are saying, when back then we thought it was the worst that it had ever been. And now, of course, it's the worst it's ever been. Went back and looked at the election of 1800 and turned it into a campaign attack ad where you've got Thomas Jefferson calling John Adams a hermaphroditic character, and they're making assertions that he wants to marry one of his children to the French monarchy, and just stuff that is truly
To be
bonkers.
fair, that accusation was true.
Well, yes, and like, but the go through some of the other things that have been claimed at the time too. It was like, one thing can be true and also not as nefarious as is being suggested. So we've always had incendiary political rhetoric. It is just one of those things about this nation and the way that it operates. That's not to say I don't wish that we would tone it down. I really do wish that we would not as much tone it down as we would get it back to something that I think more resembles what political campaigns are supposed to be about, which is less about celebrity and vibes, and what this election has certainly been very much about. And I think the last couple elections have also largely been about, and more on what these candidates want to do for people. I think we'd be better off if we did that no matter what. But I just don't see the evidence yet that suggests that these incidents that have spurred this conversation were acts of political violence or attempted political violence in the way that, say, Lee Harvey Oswald's assassination of John F. Kennedy clearly was an act of political violence. John Wilkes Booth's assassination of Abraham Lincoln, clearly an act of political violence. People with a clear agenda, a clear ideology, and a clear purpose behind what they were doing. I don't think those same things hold here, so I don't know that we should talk about them in the same way.
And I thought, Eric, that I was going to get to sound smart, and then you completely stepped on what I was about to say, and that was that
I just intuited it from you through the screen.
Intuited it, and that was that with all of the profound lunatics who have attempted in one way or another to take out a president or a political candidate, it was 1963 that was the last time that I think there was an act of that a president was shot in an act of genuine political violence, as opposed to now Lee Oswald was probably also a lunatic, but he was doing it for political reasons.
And Josh, I don't want to redirect this, but Eric said something that stuck out to me in terms of historical perspective. I actually saw it was a meme or a tweet or something a couple days ago where someone was talking about the rhetoric of nobody wants to work anymore, right? Nobody wants to work anymore. And this guy took that mantra that people have been saying, nobody wants to work anymore, from 2024 all the way back to 1873. The exact same statement. Over and over and over again, right? And you only know what you know. You only know what you've experienced. And back in 1873, that was as far as people had gotten in time, right? And so they're saying what they're saying back then. I think, and we say it now, and I think a lot of people are like, oh, well, I'm saying it. This is the first time it's ever been said. We're very myopic.
Did that slogan, nobody wants to work anymore, slow down at all in the 1930s when literally everyone wanted to work? I don't know.
There was a jump.
Or the post-war economy of the 1950s.
There was a jump. But anyway, the point is, people tend to think, hey, I'm saying this thing, or I'm just coming across this idea or this belief. It's the first time in history that it's ever happened. And it's not. And I think historical perspective is something that is necessary to help people understand even the question that this podcast is about tonight. It might be a missing of the point for people. I want people to get past that and get towards what Eric was talking about. Like, hey, how do we get towards solutions? Like, hey, is rhetoric the worst it's ever been? No. Moving on. Can we talk about how we move forward? Like, how we can fix the actual issue that's in front of us? Like, if you have some historical perspective, you can go, hey, everyone has always thought it's the worst it's ever been. Everyone has always thought democracy is on the ballot. Everyone has always thought nobody wants to work. Everybody's always thought these things. So the answer is no, this is not the worst it's ever been. Or no, this is not the first time anybody's thought this. Let's talk about the issue that we're avoiding by asking this question over here. Does that make sense? Am I making sense there?
It makes sense, and
I'm not saying the question is unfair. We still need to work
right. No, I think, Calvin, what you're saying not only makes sense, and Calvin and Eric, I guess, your point is well taken, and I think anybody that spends half an hour listening to any random podcast on saving elephants would not fault me for talking about nuanced issues. in fact, would probably not want to listen to 30 minutes for that reason, because it gets a little too much in the weeds. It's not so much that this is an exciting issue that I just think we need to talk about. It's that I think this is part of the very thing preventing us from having that conversation. And so therefore it needs to be addressed. It needs to be addressed, the nature of the rhetoric we have. In fact, to that degree, I'm inclined to agree with you, Calvin, that this is not the worst it's ever been. Maybe it ebbs and flows a little. Like Kent said, maybe the nobody wants to work anymore. It doesn't work as a statement in 1930. I'm sure there are eras in the United States history where we've lived through them, that we can go back to in our own minds and go, I don't know that it was that bad back then. That doesn't mean it wasn't worse in some previous era. But I think the Democratic Party in particular has made clear that they believe Donald Trump is a unique threat in a way that previous candidates were not. Now, and I'll just say for my part, I have, and in fact, I guess I'll just ask this question for you, gentlemen, because I know all four of us are no fan of Donald Trump. But also all four of us don't necessarily have the same opinion of what to do about that. So this is a two-part question. I would be very interested in hearing your thoughts. Is Donald Trump a threat to democracy? And secondly, if yes, if you believe he is, what do you mean by that? Because I think that's my biggest complaint, is oftentimes people leave that hanging out there. I'm like, well, Adolf Hitler was a threat to democracy, but surely our approach to Hitler is different than our approach to Trump.
I mean, I will say our approach to Hitler was. Let me circle back on that for a second. Yeah, I mean, I think that Trumpism, for lack of a better word, is definitely a threat to democracy. Do I think that Donald Trump personally is a threat to democracy in that he's going to be the bane of our existence for a long time to come? Realistically, no. He is a 78-year-old, profoundly unhealthy, both physically and mentally, old man. He's not going to be with us very long. His attitudes about government, and his tripping on my words here. His attitudes about government and his philosophy for what behavior is acceptable in the public sphere has already metastasized to so many people that we're going to be dealing with Donald Trump for decades after he's dead. So is it... I think the reason that we are going to deal with Donald Trump in a different way than we would deal with Hitler is, one, Hitler was a foreign adversary and the rules are different. And two, Hitler, when he took power, was, I believe, 42. And so there was no way other than what we did. We couldn't wait Hitler out.
Maybe I take a different tack on this. I just think democracy is stronger than that. I used
to think so.
No, I mean, the principle of it, as screwed up as we managed to do it in this country, I think democracy as an idea, even if people don't agree on what that idea is, so pervades what we do and who we are, that will outlast Donald Trump. So in that sense, I don't think he's a threat to democracy. That doesn't mean that I believe he should be, that it's just okay that he becomes president again. Because talking about political rhetoric over the years, calling someone a communist or a fascist, when it was all said and done, you can be like, yeah, we know they're not really fascists. We know they're not really communists. You say these things in a campaign. And then you listen to Donald Trump and the things that he says and the things that he's done. And I'm like, oh, that's literally fascism. Like the things that you were suggesting are fascist in nature. And so, or dictatorial, right? Depending on what he's talking about.
Just for clarification, Calvin, can you give an example of what you, not dictatorial, but fascist? Can you give an example of what it is that Trump does or says that would indicate that?
No. And I knew I shouldn't have said it because it's going to be the follow-up question. Like,
we can circle back around. I just know that that's a particularly
let me circling back around to fascism and Hitler. So those are our circle backs. Somebody write it down.
So let me do this because I hate it when someone says something like that and then they have no evidence. But off the top of my head, can I say it? No. Can I provide you show notes later? Absolutely. So let's do that.
I can do a couple things. I can,
Ken can do it right now. All right. So I got Ken as backup. Ken's my understudy here.
I can do say a couple of things, and I'm sure there's a longer list. But from the very beginning, Donald Trump started his political career, and I'm going to skip over. Birtherism for a moment, and say that he started his political career on the first day that he said, "I should be president, and I want you to vote for me." He very famously did it by demonizing and calling out a particular race and ethnicity as saying they are drug dealers and they are criminals, and started turning the people that he appealed to against a particular ethnicity. Further on in that campaign cycle, he looked at his primary opponent for the job he wanted and whipped up his fans into not only believing but chanting that she should be in prison. Those are two things which are endemic of fascism.
They're also endemic of a lot of other authoritarian and other systems, which is why I think we should probably get off this topic, because I don't know that we want to have a didactic examination of what we believe or not believe fascism is, in part because there's such massive disagreement about it. I'll agree with Calvin in the sense that I do think that there are authoritarian tendencies in the way that Trump speaks and acts. And one of the reasons that I've always been a little non-exercised in the way that everybody else was losing their minds about Trump is because, frankly, I just think he's too dumb and lazy to do most of the things that I think he may even want to do. And I'm not even 100% certain that he wants to do a lot of the things he says he wants to do, because he says he wants to do a lot of things and they're often in contradiction with each other. So I'll answer your democracy on the ballot question. Is he a threat to democracy? Not really. I mean, I think that there's a colorable argument that you can make about that. Certainly, my answer on all of this is, why Donald Trump should not be president again always begins and ends with pretty much the exact same thing, which is a guy who tried to steal an election and fomented political violence. If we want an example of political violence, January 6th, I think, is an example of political violence, fomented political violence in the name of trying to steal an election. I don't think that person should be elected again. The system, however, like a threat to democracy. And I'll finish my statement now, and I'll bring that around to address that point. What was remarkable about the way that our system handled all of that is because it actually was never really all that threatened. I mean, there was a bum riot at the United States Capitol that we should mostly be embarrassed by, rather than, I've always hated the rhetoric that said that this was some kind of, an armed coup. Look back through history, this is just, these were really a bunch of obviously awful idiots acting in terrible ways. They should be arrested. They should be punished. But the idea that they were going to steal the papers from the House of Representatives and we weren't going to be able to certify an election, none of that was ever really in threat. And I just don't see our system being so weak, so fragile, and so vulnerable that even if the man wins again, that he's going to stay in office for forever. He already tried it once and it didn't work. I think it's a bad statement about the American people in a way if he is returned to office after all of that. But it also tells you something about how they feel about whether or not this person was a threat to the American way of doing things or to democracy, that there's a large cohort of people that don't agree with that, which I think is something worth considering.
Calvin, looks like you're pondering something there.
I am, and I'm going to continue to ponder it.
Fair enough. Well, this is a big, and I think I will take responsibility for getting us on too far of a fascistic thread because I mentioned the name Adolf Hitler in my very question, and I did that for a reason. I did that because I wanted to come up with some stark example. Presumably, we would all agree with this, that Trump is no Hitler. He's not Hitler for a variety of reasons.
What's Jonah Goldberg's joke? Hitler could have repealed Obamacare.
Yeah, exactly. Hitler could have got that done, and I think that's entirely true. But I do think there's a necessity of understanding your Joseph Stalins, your Adolf Hitlers. There are individuals who have the will, the drive, the conniving nature to seek power in that way, and whatever horrible things you can say of Donald Trump, I don't think that is true of him. Now, maybe it's not true of him because he's just too lazy or incompetent. I don't know. Maybe it's not true of him because he doesn't have that sort of bloodthirsty desire to power. I don't think he's really that interested in power. I think he's just interested in being respected and return and sort of some sort of a vengeance against those he perceives as having done him wrong. I don't think the end game is to be in power forever.
The problem there is that's what they said about Hitler. Right? Historical perspective. It's like, oh, he's not ambitious. He doesn't want all of these things. And then he rose to power, and he's just this bombastic person that people were drawn to and created the worst political violence the world has ever seen, or some of the worst political violence the world has ever seen, right? So that's my only pushback in that I don't underestimate what January 6th was. Yeah, they were just some country bumpkins, backwater guys climbing. The memes that came out of that were great. They're just hilarious. But I think the more dangerous thing that comes out of it is there's a lot more of those kinds of people all across this country, right? Who do have violent feelings about what may come next. I work with people who are actively buying guns and talking about their bunkers right now if Kamala Harris wins. So I think that January 6th, yes, while it's just some country backwater bumpkins, should alert you to a sentiment that is running through particular strands of our country, right? The British thought of the colonists as country backwater bumpkins, and we took their country, right?
Well,
so, and I'm not saying it's that dire, but I'm just saying don't.
I mean, we didn't take
underestimate. What I'm getting back to is do not underestimate what January 6th means, and do not underestimate. Hey, I don't think Donald Trump wants that. He's kind of too lazy. Don't underestimate what could happen is what I'm getting at. Because every time someone underestimates a bad leader, that bad leader rises to power and does really terrible things in this world.
But I think you're correct, Calvin. The problem is I think there is an equal danger with overestimating things.
Yes.
I think that when we describe every political opponent as Hitler, then when the literal Hitler shows up, it's hard. So there's a necessity in trying to describe things accurately. And I think I think every one of us on this call has been trying to do that as faithfully as we can. It is true that January 6th was pretty pathetic in comparison to, say, parts of the French or the Russian revolutions. It wasn't as organized. This wasn't, this was sort of the country bumpkins in a sense. It is also true that kind of repeated effort is what eventually gets you to overthrowing a government. But I think there's sort of a danger in which when Trump makes these ridiculous, awful claims about, well, maybe he needs to be a dictator for a day to straighten things out, which, to be honest, I think that alone would be disqualifying for somebody who wants to be president. But I think there is a desire in the country among certain individuals, maybe nobody on this call, to hear that and to say he's being, what is that old phrase that his supporters take him serious but not literal? His opponents take him literal but not serious.
Yeah. Yes.
And I think there can be a danger when you keep saying, aha, see right there. He is this sort of fascist dictator in sheep's clothing, where you have another part of the country saying, wait a minute, he was president for 4 years. I understand you didn't like what he did, but it's not like, it's not like we were in imminent danger of a civil war the way you guys are making this out sound. So I guess all I'm suggesting is that not underestimating someone and not overestimate someone is both necessary in order to preserve something like democracy.
I guess that's my critique of the rhetoric in general is that, I think there are threads that you can trace through history. You know, again, I'll reference the election of 1800 and some of the things that have been said there. And even I remember thinking in like 2004, the Bush-Kerry election, I'm like, wow, that was really heated. I don't know if I'll ever see another one like that in my lifetime. And boy, was I wrong. Boy, was I wrong about that one. I think it's what has always bothered me most is the catastrophization of all of it is the proclamations that you get from both sides, of both Republicans and Democrats, that this is the most important election of our lifetimes. And if we don't win this one, the country is over. And I've always agreed with the answer to that point that says if the outcome of this election determines whether or not this country is over, the country is already over, because that's just not the way that American system of government is supposed to work. And I don't think that we have reached that point of failure yet. I mean, I think we have a lot of challenges, Josh. I know we're both big fans of Yuval Levin and of his identification of a lot of the problems facing American institutions, particularly governmental and the institutions that surround American government. I think there are some real serious problems. I think we should deal with them seriously. But I don't think we are on the precipice of this nation ceasing to exist, or that the outcome of this election, even if it is returning Donald Trump to the presidency, a place that I don't think he should be anywhere near, is going to precipitate to the end of the country. And Calvin, your protestation of that it's one should take these things, the possibility that things are much worse than we think they are, very seriously, is well taken, and I think we should all think about it. But I just, there's a lot more evidence that I would want to see that we are Weimar Germany watching the rise of somebody like Adolf Hitler. I just all the comparisons to me fall apart almost instantly. I don't think we're that weak. I don't think we're that threatened, and I don't think this one election is going to be that determinative.
Yeah, and I don't want to be alarmist. I do take Josh's point and your point very well. I want to find that middle ground. I just don't want people to wave off and underestimate. Right. Exactly. I don't want to overestimate either. I want to perfectly estimate. And I meet far too many people who are like, he's not Hitler. Moving on. It's like, but then there's some dangerous.
You can be not Hitler and still be very bad.
So they stop paying attention.
Mussolini, for instance, was not Hitler. Yes. Also very bad.
I want people to keep their eye on the ball. And so I don't want them to dismiss the dangerous things that are happening. Yeah. Is he Hitler? No. Okay, fine. We understand that. But there are some alarming things that are being done that we should probably pay attention to.
Calvin, I would tell you or ask you to, when your coworkers say that they're investing in guns and bunkers should Kamala Harris ascend to the presidency, ask them if they know who's president right now and who's vice president right now, and if they think it's going to be that big of a difference. I don't anticipate that big of a difference.
Democrats getting elected to the presidency has always been really good for gun sales. There's been a history of that in this country, and it's that there have always been some of the prepper types who are always going to be again a little goofbally. But
I'm reminded, Calvin, as we're talking about this under or overestimate, what is the line in The Office where Jan says, "Well, I'm sorry, Michael, I guess I underestimated." She said, "Well, Jan, maybe next time you will estimate me." and I think that I'm with you. I think we want to strike a middle ground here, but it probably needs to be said, and maybe this is what you're getting at, Calvin. Striking a middle ground does not mean zapping your passion out of it. You can simultaneously look to something like January 6th and say those were a bunch of country bumpkins, that it was ridiculous to think they would ever actually successfully still an election overthrow the United States government. And simultaneously say, and I'm really pissed off about that. And anyone involved in that, including Donald Trump's apologists in my Republican Party, who say, wasn't that big of a deal. I don't want anything to do with them. Maybe it wasn't the direct threat it could have been, but that is so dishonorable and so offensive to what I understand the United States to be, that, maybe it wasn't a threat, but I no longer can take you serious, and I can no longer respect you. Because of your inability to just call a spade and say that this is wrong. I don't know if there's a question there.
No. You know what? One question that did occur to me, and this probably comes up on your show, Josh, more than I'm aware. But when you talk about people who are disreputable and not worthy of respect and contemptible, what would have to happen for you to come to the point where you say, and you referred to my Republican Party, what would have to happen for you to get to the point where you say the entire leadership of this party is contemptible and not worthy of respect? So am I still a member of this party?
That's a good question, one that we probably wouldn't be able to adequately that I would not be able to adequately answer in whatever time we have remaining. But I will just say as a couple maybe bookends. Well, first of all, I don't know. I think it's a matter of degree, not kind, possibly. It's called saving elephants for a reason. I mean, I saw somebody post the other day, look, if the Democratic Party could survive Jim Crow, the Civil War, and be what it is today, and granted that happened, more than a century ago, then it seems plausible parties can change over time. There are still some very decent individuals in the Republican Party. Yep. And let me clarify in what I just said there. I do not respect Donald Trump's enablers on the Republican side. I do not. I loathe far more than the MAGA Americans. And some MAGA Americans are family and friends of mine. So I don't loathe MAGA Americans, but that ideology, that mindset that led to January 6th, which is despicable. What I loathe far more than that are his enablers who knew that Donald Trump lost the election and yet nonetheless pretended as if he didn't for their own personal political expediency. Those are leaderships within the Republican Party. That's not most of the rank and file. Those are the leaders. It is true that they make up the majority, at least at a congressional level. And I recognize that sort of, I wouldn't call it, I don't know what you would call that incongruity, I guess, with I'm still a supporter of a Republican. The problem is I am a conservative. I haven't changed there. And we have only two vehicles at present, the Republican Democratic Party. Now, there's a lot of ways in the Republican Party doesn't represent, in my views, conservative values. But I also think throughout my lifetime, it is most likely they would eventually get there. And so it's a long-term game I'm trying to play here. Now, yes, maybe it's possible 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 50 years from now, maybe something could happen or something could happen enough that I would say, we can't recover from this. But it would take quite a bit more sustained, I guess, misdirection, if you will.
I know that I am very comfortable living under a tent that is large enough to host both Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Dick Cheney. If the tent is big enough for both of those people, I'll find a way.
Since you brought up Dick Cheney, I just want to make a fun note for the purpose of history. Yesterday, which would have been the 21st, September 21st, was the 20th anniversary of the release of the album American Idiot by Green Day.
Hey.
And 20 years later, both Billy Joe Armstrong and Dick Cheney are supporting the same candidate for president.
Perfect. But you know who's not? George W. Bush, who is remarkably silent.
Interesting.
I think he enjoys being remarkably silent.
Yeah.
And actually, there's something I find incredibly pleasing and dignified about the fact that he has done almost nothing political in his post-presidency. I actually think that that's probably a good thing for a good example for more presidents to follow in their post-presidency.
If I had to, this is off topic, but if I had to make a guess, and this is one of those things that is absolutely unfalsifiable, if I had to make a guess, I would say that the former President Bush is exactly where Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney are, and thinks that in his particular case, it would do more harm than good to say something.
Yep.
So,
I think that's probably right.
And I think that's and I think it was Cal Davenport that made this comment in the last panel we had. When I think he's absolutely right about this. I think the left, present party excluded, I think the left overplays its hand in this notion. Well, Liz Cheney and Dick Cheney, and look at all of these individuals on the right who now support our cause. That doesn't play well in the Republican Party. They recognize those individuals to be their enemy. more than their friend. And there are, I think sometimes it's,
which is
I don't
just insane.
Yeah.
To me, these are people who, when I was in the Republican Party, these are people who we supported indiscriminately.
Mm-hmm.
When they shoot somebody in the face,
these were God's right hand. These were Jesus's candidate. If you were in evangelical Christianity, which I grew up in, so I had that kind of overlap, right? The religious and the political. So there's a whole history around white Christian nationalism and all that jazz. But for those people who were the epitome of conservative ideology, the head of the Republican Party, to be respected. I still respect George W. Bush to this day, even though I know all the terrible things that happened, right? It's fascinating to me that those people who were revered by the Republican Party are now the enemy of the Republican Party for not endorsing Donald Trump. So the fact that it doesn't play well in the Republican Party is scary to me, because people in the Republican Party are the people who taught me how to reason. And it seems like their ability to reason, your party's ability to reason, the base's ability to reason, is just shot. Because it used to be you go, hey, A, therefore B. Like, oh, A, therefore B. Makes sense. And now it's like A, therefore B. That makes me very angry. I don't know what's happened to your party that all reason has been abandoned when it comes to pointing out reality and facts on the ground. That is part of my concern and my probably overestimation when I'm seeing this kind of leadership and reality on the ground no longer mattering. I'm concerned that you're running into a perfect storm that we may not be able to control. And so I don't want to overestimate and scare people, but I think that we should hope for the best and prepare for the worst, like everybody. And I think that that needs to be on the table, because there is a part of your party that is
JD Vance, I think is, yeah.
There's a part of your party that I think people on our side of the aisle are deathly afraid are going to be violent if they do not get their way.
Well, could I say two things? Mm-hmm. One, I do think there are elements of the. I want to get out of talking about political parties for a moment and just talk about, the political movements or political sides, right, left. There are elements of the political left that I think there are completely and obviously reasons to feel are also going to be violent depending on how this election turns out. So I think that is a fear that can be, we can debate how much and the degree and the volume of it, but it can be equally addressed at both sides. I think we underestimate, maybe people in this conversation don't, but generally underestimate how much of the Republican Party these days is dictated by what are perceived to be the failures of the second term of George W. Bush and that period of time that then followed it. The Tea Party, which I was involved with back in 2008 through 2011 or so, before my own defection with it, I always understood as a delayed backlash to George W. Bush and the way that particularly the last 2 years of his presidency were handled, than having that much to do with Barack Obama. There were some elements of racism and some other awful stuff that was also going on there that I didn't recognize clearly at the time, and with the benefit of hindsight, I'm more able to identify now. But I think so much of it dominates the Republicans.
Did you just live with it? Because
no,
that's what I keep running into
think
right
that,
now.
Well, look, I think I think there have always been terrible actors that you can point to on both the left and the right who have employed race as a vehicle to try to advance themselves in some really particularly awful ways. I think to the extent that I saw that it existed, I thought that it was a minority, and I always tried to, if it ever came up, I was a Tea Party leader in the city of Chicago. Our demographic was wildly different than most Tea Party organizations around the country. We were like heavily laden with like Ron Paul people who were overly concerned about the Iraq war and foreign policy. I didn't hear a lot of that kind of stuff, but to the extent that I did, I always tried to say something like, that's not why I'm here. That's not what it's about. And frankly, I find that viewpoint repugnant. So I don't know. I'm open to the critique that maybe I tolerated something that I shouldn't have tolerated, but I really don't think that I thought it was as much pronounced an element of that movement as it, I think in hindsight, it was more pronounced. I still don't think it was the predominant thing that was going on there. I think there was a lot more that had to do with Republican dissatisfaction. And this is one of the things that frustrates me about the modern conservative movement and the modern Republican Party is they're repeating the same mistakes. They made promises that if you just elect us, we can get these things done. And they were things that could not be gotten done even if you got Republicans elected into office. And a perfect example of this in the post-Bush era was, even while Obama was president, was elect us and we'll repeal Obamacare. Give us the House and we'll repeal Obamacare. Okay, we gave them the House. Give us the Senate, we'll repeal Obamacare. They still couldn't do it because Obama was never going to sign away his signature issue. So that was never going to happen there. But they kept lying to their constituents and saying that it was possible. And I think that kind of building people up to think something can happen that can't, and the frustration that comes along with it, to me, explains a lot of the phenomenon that you were just talking about and why people like George W. Bush and Dick Cheney and John McCain and Mitt Romney are looked upon with scorn because they are losers. They are people who were defeated by Democrats, and because, and this drives me insane, but it's the narrative that exists, they just didn't fight hard enough. And if they fought hard enough, they would have won. And it's idiotic, and it doesn't make any sense to me, but it's what a lot of people believe.
Well, speaking of fighting, and we're coming up to the end of the hour, so to try to be careful to possibly bring us back to the topic at hand, all of these rabbit trails are good, by the way, and we could make each one of these.
I apologize for all of them.
No, it's fun. We should do more of that.
I think we're all equally guilty in this conversation. I'm not pointing the finger at anyone, and maybe we could pick each one of them and make a future panel out of it. But the election coming up, and I said this in 2020, and I'm saying it again in 2024, my strongest desire is not between who wins the election. It's the fact that all of us agree who won the election. It's the fact that we can get through this and very clearly say, okay, this was a decisive election. I don't think it's going to be that.
From your lips to God's ears, I am not optimistic.
I don't think that's going to happen. And let me be frank. Even if the vast majority of it, even if the election is, if Trump or Harris win in a landslide, there are going to be some people out there still questioning those results. What I mean is if the margins are large enough, it's going to be impossible for Trump to do in 2024 what he did in 2020 and gain nearly as much ground with it. That being said, I think we're heading to that train wreck. I think this is going to happen all over again. It looks like this is going to be another squeaker of an election.
Okay, to the point of this conversation, I know we're coming to the end of this hour.
Yeah.
That is a concern because you have election workers who, if you were casting doubt on the election, the veracity of the vote, you are now putting the lives of election workers at risk. I live in Detroit. Downtown Detroit in 2020, the people that showed up down at Huntington Place, which is where they were counting all the votes, right? The people that showed up there banging on the doors trying to get in were putting the lives of election workers who are just volunteers in physical danger. That is a concern with the rhetoric around, especially denying the election results. That is something that I would definitely, that's a hill I would die on and say, hey, the rhetoric definitely needs to be toned down on this, because if you were casting doubt on that, you are going to put people's lives in danger if they feel like an election is being stolen from their guy and they're willing to be violent.
And Calvin, to that point, I guess that's where I'm getting at here is one of the differences, and possibly in our favor, between 2024 and 2020 is Trump's not in the White House. It's going to look different. So what cards he can play. And again, I'm not saying he's going to lose. He could win this thing for all I know. I am not necessarily concerned with, and maybe I should be. I don't think we're looking at civil war. I don't think we're looking at an actual armed attempt to overthrow government. But I am concerned with exactly what you're talking about. I am concerned there is going to be pockets of violence across the country in various precincts for various reasons. Maybe that's overblown, but I guess that's kind of where I want to close in that very, I guess, dark subject. Is political violence likely in 2024? And if so, what, if anything, could we do about that?
I think political violence it depends on what size and scope you're talking about. I think political violence is 100% unavoidable on a case-to-case basis, on a small bore basis. But what you said about Trump not being president on January 6th, 2025, and the important dates that come before that could mean everything. Because I know for 100% certain that the Capitol on January 6th, 2025 is going to, it will look like Inauguration Day instead of just like a typical day in the first week of the year, which has been the norm. So I don't anticipate another mob for that reason, and for a more pedestrian reason, and that is, say what you will about the Attorney General and the molasses-like speed at which the Justice Department has been working in the last few years, but there are an awful lot of the people who are crazy enough to commit violence for Donald Trump, who are guests of the federal correction system and are not available to commit violence for Donald Trump.
Calvin, you want me to go and you want a minute?
Go right ahead.
All right. I think Ken is right, particularly about that last point. I mean, I think it's sad, and I don't want to wish this into existence. And I'm quite glad to see that what I feared about the scene outside the Democratic National Convention in Chicago looking more like 1968 than it looked. I turned out to be wrong about that. So I'm quite glad. I do think if it were Biden who was being renominated, I think it might have been a different scene outside. But that's something we can only explore through the multiverse once somebody discovers how to access it. I think Ken's point is well taken that a lot of those people who were willing to do that kind of stuff are currently guests of the federal detention facilities somewhere around this country. I don't know where that kind of violence would transpire if it were Harris who won, but I do have the fear that it would pop up in some places. I think if Trump wins, I think you're going to see some pretty significant stuff happen in major cities. I think New York, DC, Chicago, Los Angeles. I think you're going to see street action that is going to turn probably into violence and rioting. I hope I'm wrong about both of these, but I think, sadly, those are the two things that are most likely. And I think it is just an absolute tragedy that we have, that political leaders and people who could have taken off ramps to this kind of stuff a long time ago have refused to do so, and have figured that they can use this stuff for their own benefit. I think that's a shame. Those people should be shunned. But I hope none of that is necessary, because I just hope that I am completely and totally wrong about that prediction.
I guess I'll end with hope. Obviously I hope Kamala Harris wins. There's a shirt I want to buy that says Harris Walls, obviously. I think it's funny. And it's pretty in your face. But also, to me, like, the obvious choice, like, it's just like, can we come down from the fever dream? That's what I'm hoping happens when all the dust settles at the end of this political season. I hope that Kamala Harris becomes the president of the United States, and we return to some sense of political norms. It has not been normal, right? And politics is crazy to begin with. It has not been normal. And I'm hoping that people wake up from a fever dream and go, okay, let's admit it, a lot of damage was done in the last. We don't want to do that again. We've seen the results. Let's not do that again. We don't have to be on the same side of things, but let's stick to some norms. I hope we get back to that. That's really what I'm hoping for. I'd like a Mitt Romney saying, "Hey, President Obama, happy anniversary. I'm sure you wanted to be anywhere else than on this debate stage," rather than, a guy attacking immigrants in Ohio for eating dogs and cats.
Yeah.
Right. So
we got so
amen to
far
that.
into this podcast without
That's
mentioning the dog.
literally what I was thinking. Is we almost made it without mentioning the dog and cat story.
Anyhow, well, fun to end on.
Somebody had to check that off their bingo card, so Calvin just needed to get it in at the end.
Hey, I appreciate all of you guys. I always enjoy these panels. I always enjoy my conversations with each of you. And I think I'll just say in closing that, for anybody watching, we love our country. I think as Eric was saying earlier, it's easy to catastrophize this stuff sometimes. It's not that this isn't a big deal. Don't get me wrong. It is. But the reality is, Kent, Calvin, Eric, and I do not agree on a lot of policies, but we're friends. We don't hate each other. We don't see each other as the enemy, maybe the opponent. I'm sure there'll be other conversations we'll have where the debate might get more heated. But I really think the four of us here better represent the nation as a whole than that thin slice of the very online and the very angry. And I do think there is hope for our country, as Calvin's saying, that maybe we will wake up out of that fever dream, because I really do think there are more of us than there are of those willing to perpetrate acts of violence in this country. So with that, gentlemen, thank you again for a good conversation. Thank you, everyone watching, and we will see you guys next time.